Hello, people of Earth. Welcome back to another Parallel Perception podcast with Lujan Matus. I'm your host, David Bernard. We've got another fantastic episode for you. We hope. We don't know how it's going to go yet because we haven't done it, but we hope this will be another wonderful episode. We're here with a special guest, Kyle Vandenbroek. He is a part of the community. I've known him for years, kind of peripherally. I see you in the classes. I watched your videos where you've interviewed Lujan as well, and we wanted to reach out and have you on the podcast officially. So I'm turning it over to you. Why don't you start with your first one?
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Lujan, I was just curious. So Lou Elizondo is like this whistleblower UFO guy, came out with a new book this last week, and everyone's kind of like hyped up about it. Being like aliens coming, people getting abducted. There's lots of disclosure talk, like hard to know with all of the different official people coming out and saying things about disclosure and that, like, you know, UFOs are for sure a real thing and like aliens are here, we're having communications with them, we got lizard people, we got mantis people, we got all sorts of like conversations around what is actually going on. But the real question I'm curious about is like, so how much should we be concerned about it and think about it, and if there's practices to actually communicate with these entities, is that a good idea? Like, I know Stephen Greer has like a whole program where he like has an app and does meditations where people can invite UAPs, UFOs or whatever to come and communicate with them. So I don't know, I'm curious if you've had any communications with entities beyond here lately.
Yeah, the first thing I want to put forward is that Stephen Greer is probably the only person that I would trust with this, because there are no violent entities coming to this planet to have their way with us. It's only we're having our way with ourselves in terms of manipulating consciousness for the ways and the ends of mean for who wants to keep control. Now the next thing that I will say is that they say that aliens are demons. They're traveling transdimensionally. They're coming into our reality and they're appearing as light, and then become manifest as a three-dimensional UFO. The thing that debunks that, as far as I'm concerned, is that to have that type of technology, you travel transdimensionally. And to travel transdimensionally, you go out of the three-dimensional slipstream and you go into another slipstream where you automate it, and the craft is sentient and it appears within our reality. Just say they came from Zeta Reticuli, a binary system. It takes them 15 minutes to get here. And it takes them 50 minutes to get here instead of thousands of years, because they travel transdimensionally and they come through particular wormholes. So when you look at this, they're not demons that are appearing, that are coming from another dimension. They're three-dimensional beings that travel transdimensionally and appear transdimensionally before they become three-dimensional, and then they say these aliens are demons. So there's a lot of misconception in terms of who they are and what they're doing. I had experience when I was a young child. I've had experience when I was 33, and I've had a recent experience here in Sedona. And everything that I would say, if they were violent, why aren't we destroyed? Because we're taking them down with HAARP. We're being very weaponized towards them. And the United States had an exchange program for 13 years. Did you know that? Yeah, they had an exchange program for 13 years. And they sent maybe 12 to 13 people to the binary system, and a few of them stayed, and then a few of them came back, and they were affected by radiation and everything like that. And then things went south because we didn't want to spiritually go; we just wanted technology. So then they were realizing that we're kind of like tricksters instead of honest and open, and have a universal mind in terms of harmonization. We only the governments are very, very selfish about becoming dominant in terms of the technologies that they can take from these particular vehicles and from these beings to become more superior in terms of the war consciousness that we've got on our planet. Yeah, that's the first thing. So Dr. Greer is right, they're non-violent.
So I have a question about the Draco then. That's something that crops up into lore. You know, the idea of lizard people is something you see in a lot of cultures. It's baked into our language. You know, we have words like draconian. Like, were there such a thing? Are we the only trickster entity in the three-dimensional space, or have there been other ones that have influenced us, or you know?
Okay, I've heard stories from swamis that have had connected or have gone to the planet. They have these skills to go to the planet, and they say that they've had contact with these lizard people. But that is not my experience. The only one experience I've had with this is that I was in a scene, and the whole room was packed. Like my three-dimensional world now, I look at my room, it's empty. When I had this experience, the room was full of beings, cramped packed, shoulder to shoulder, and walking was very difficult because there were so many beings surrounding us. Now, I saw a Draco being walk past me, look at me very gently, and keep going. I didn't get a feeling of violence. Not at all. So I don't really trust the narrative in terms of be scared of something that is different to you, because I've had the experience of communing with beings from another planetary system. Even though they're different, the corresponding effect upon the heart is quite extraordinary, because their craft are sentient. They communicate with you in terms of your intentionality. So the craft will fulfill your needs, because they're sentient. The craft are absolutely sentient, and that's where we're heading with our technology in terms of AI. And the transmission of experience is complete. They transmit their feelings to you, and you receive their feelings, and they from an automatic perspective, they get your experience exactly like an empath. So the reason I come to this conclusion, because I was dropped off, and the craft was really, really huge. They dropped me off to where I was residing, and as I looked up, I dropped to my knees and I said, "Please don't leave me. I don't want to be here again. I do not want to come back here." I dropped to my knees and I was desperate. I was totally distraught. And from that experience, please don't leave me. And it took me years to realize I wasn't saying, "Please don't leave me." They were saying, "We don't want to leave you, but we've got no other choice." So as I grew, from my experience of being within, my empathic fortitude bloomed and grew stronger and stronger because of my experience with beings who communicate exactly like this. They're in a state of communion. They're empathically inclined because you arrive inside of them and they arrive inside of you. So there's no dichotomy. There's no difference. You are them and they are you simultaneously. So the communication is instant. And they say that when they did get these particular individuals or Ebens, when they got people who would try to send thought forms to them, but it's not thought forms which are sent. It is feelings composed of an enormous amount of information which is transmitted to you, then becomes thought forms that can unify the technological thing that they're transmitting to you as information that a physicist or a what do you call someone who builds machinery and bridges? What do you call that? Engineers. Yeah, the engineers will grab this and then they'll have the whole blueprint within their visual matrix, but it came as feeling first, and the feeling then arrives as a technological capability of putting something together. So that's virtually how we're meant to be growing in terms of our technology, except we're separated. We've got this separation factor in terms of I have this inspiration, but we all know this is not true, and I can prove that, because if one monkey breaks something with a tool 10,000 miles away from another island, the next monkey will do exactly the same thing. We're inherently meant to do this. We're meant to realize when somebody realizes something. We're not to realize something and then it's just in one small pocket of consciousness. No, it spreads to the whole planet. So when you realize what is going on, you put our children on a PlayStation, and they're fighting war. What are they doing? They're transmitting war all over the planet via their realizations. So the technologies that we subject our kids to is the expansion of the military industrial complex in terms of what they want our consciousness to reside within a warlike framework. which is not going to work because it's destroying us. The financial system is going to collapse if we don't get to the bottom of this and go to higher, newer technologies, and exactly the same as what Dr. Greer proposes in his recitations towards this subject matter. So we are meant to be this way.
It would make sense to, in my line, like if a civilization gets to the point where they can have this kind of technology, they must have had some sort of synergy between each other, not warring and fighting and almost killing each other. Like they would come to a place of peace and love and like acceptance of one another, so they could actually work together to grow this.
Okay, now the only thing that I would say is questionable within your statement is, why do civilizations have to go through a financial system and war to realize that enlightenment is at their feet, and they're not prostrating to it and saying we need this? What if a civilization grew and they didn't know what war was? They didn't know what conflict was because they didn't even go there. So even when we express our consciousness, that consciousness says, well, another civilization has to go through these periods of darkness to get to the light or to become technologically advanced. Why have they got to be like us? I do believe our planet is divided, good and evil. We're meant to be here to decide who we're going to be. That's what this planet is all about. So when an entity comes in from another solar system that doesn't understand war, the financial system we've got, which is ridiculous, and where we're not living peacefully, they will be seen as a threat. So we'll bring them down and say they're evil, and they're no good for us because they're demons coming out of a transdimensional reality and appearing here like this. You've got to look at our own consciousness, what we do with purity in comparison to the set rules and regulations of the people who are making a lot of money out of keeping everyone enslaved to the idea of conflict and money. So when the default of human consciousness is to say, well, they must have gone through that to get to that, gone through this to get to that. No, what if they just got to that? And they were in pure harmony with their environment because there was no need to do anything else, because harmony was what was represented to the species, and they grew through that harmony. And as they grew through the harmony, then universal consciousness or this type of awareness adheres to their reality, and then they come here, and they're terrorized by our barbarism when they crash. Because they'll scream and cry because we come at them with loaded guns, with this violence that doesn't represent their species, and we don't want to represent that kindness coming towards it. We just want to obtain their technology so we can further inflame what we're doing.
Luhan, do you ascribe to the idea that the Anunnaki were a thing and they engineered us and built into us like a covetousness of gold, that they came here for gold, and they engineered us to mine the gold for them, and we were bioengineered by aliens?
Yes, I'm sure we were bioengineered, that's for sure. But which species bioengineered us is the main issue. I don't really know. To be quite frank, it's not right for me to pretend I know anything about the Anunnaki. But the thing is that they're looked at as if they're gods, and we're less than that. As maybe we've been fiddled with to a certain degree, and some process they've switched on a worship gene, and we worship what we shouldn't be worshiping. We go away from our own heart and worship something external. So that made us easier to control, and then our telomeres get too short, and we'd live a shorter life. So how can we realize something in a period of 70 to 80 years? It's virtually impossible unless you can harvest your previous lifetimes to actually bring you to a point of understanding more than what you're meant to learn, what you can learn when you're born. So I think human history has been distorted, and we've been lied to extensively. I believe this more than anything else, and anything that is brought forward in terms of who did this or who did that is highly questionable. until we've got all these beings around us and they're physically in front of us, and so this is the truth, because all of our truths are bent on lies on this planet. We're not truthful beings. It's a planet of lies. Even the religions, they're locked within their truth, but their truth is dogma. So how can that be truth if it's dogma? So you've got people lying. They're dogmatically lying, and then you got people who got authority that are lying with the truth, or locking the truth in by not allowing us to have all the information. So how can we tell exactly what the past is in terms of our present moment? And the only way we can discover who we're really meant to be is in our present moment, is our hearts to be subject to something which is more pure, or more in balance, more capable of universal harmony, is where we need to go, and leave the past that's been forced onto us, and not really knowing what the truth really is. Because you ask anybody, is there such thing as giants? And as soon as they find a giant skeleton, they whisk it away and say, no, that's not true. And only recently in Afghanistan, 10 years ago, they brought down a guy with a beard that was maybe 17 feet tall. And they were really, really scared. And this was a red-headed, bearded guy, white skin. And, this has been hidden from us. So they're always hiding the past from us. So if they're hiding the past from us, why are they doing that? Because not telling the truth will give them the possibility to direct our consciousness down a so-called false history instead of the real history of our planet. And that's what we need to get to, is our real history. So answering your question is not really answering your question, because we need transparency in our world, so that we can really travel on the truth of who we're really meant to become, because of who we really were. And what we're missing is an open heart and pure union or communion with our fellow human beings, which will translate into communion with other beings that feel comfortable enough to appear here without being jailed or put into isolation. Because if our consciousness is subject to them, then we change dramatically. And I know this to be a truth, because I've had contact, so I've been changed dramatically. So everything I do in Taoism, everything from a Buddhist perspective, from a Christian perspective, that I understand has changed completely, because something opened me up to greater possibilities, and those greater possibilities have got to do with communion and harmonization with the universal forces. And are we doing that when we pollute the water, pollute the air, and try and make us sick so they make money out of us? The financial system has got to do with sickness, really.
I remember, Luhan, the first low band pi training I did with you. We were sitting there and you were talking, and I remember seeing someone on the far end of the room look very quickly to the right, and you looked at the same time at the same direction, and I looked and followed your gaze, and I saw nothing. But then she said, "Oh, did you see that?" And she said there was an orb that came through the wall, floated, and then went through. And you said, "Oh yeah, I see that." And so there's a lot of people talking about these orbs, people who have who have been abducted, these orbs kind of following them into their homes and these sorts of things. Do you know what those orbs are?
Okay, these orbs, they can be small like this. They can be smaller orbs like small bubbles, or they can be big orbs. I had blue orbs coming off I'll tell you a pure experience. I had blue orbs coming off my shoulders. Everyone's saying there's blue orbs coming out of your body. And then years later, I discovered there was a transdimensional blue being inside of my body, representing me for years inside of me, watching everything that I was doing, taking into consideration my consciousness or being there as a witness. And one day I was teaching a student of mine, I got up out of the chair, the blue transdimensional being stayed in the chair. My student's never been the same since. And I looked around at it and I knew exactly what it was, who it was, what this transdimensional being is. You could describe it as an alien, of course it is, but it's a very, very advanced consciousness because it doesn't have physical form. So it sits inside your physical form. But the experience of that goes very, very deep. I was sitting with 3 people after this, and I found an object and it looked like granite. Now, the technology that they got in the future, they look like granite. They're really, really strange. And this granite object was on the table. I had 3 students in front of me. I spotted it and knew exactly what it was. And I don't know whether I should go into the story of this because it's quite intense. But they saw something different. I knew exactly what it was. They saw 3 different things in terms of what they thought it was. But as soon as I saw it, I knew it was a monitoring device. And that monitoring device was monitoring everything that was going on. And when I spotted it, I knew it was millions of years in advance to any technology that we could ever conceive of. So when I saw that, I had the immediate impression is, oh, now I know why I feel like I'm being followed, why I'm being listened to. And now our technology is getting to the point where you can be followed, you can be listened to, but it's a very, very childish level of technology we're on the moment, even though we've got those technologies from advanced beings. These technologies disappeared. They're not ours. They're from extraterrestrial crafts. That's why we've advanced so quickly, and we're so good at tinkering with things. We change things to something which benefits our agenda instead of being with it and then using that technology in a righteous way or the proper way. Yeah. I could get into the story, but it's very, very big and very scary actually. For me, I was threatened. And it's very, very difficult to tell you how I was threatened, because it wasn't done in this dimension. It was done in another dimension, and it wasn't by those beings. It was with the technological advancement of human beings that could put me in another dimension and capture me. Because there was a stage when I was doing online spiritual guidance with 3 different individuals. There were 3 different couples. And they said, we're being abducted. And I said, no, you're not being abducted. You're being abducted by your own species, which are cloaked. And you're not being abducted by another species. This is wrong, because they're setting us up for fear of an alien presence, because the human beings have got the advanced technology and they can abduct a human being. They look like aliens, but they're cloaked. And they've got this cloaking technology. And when I said to my students, I said, no, you're not being abducted by aliens, you're being abducted by your own species, and this is how they do it. And the very same night I get abducted by exactly the same people. And I as soon as I come out of the vision, I say, good try. And then 2 days later, I have somebody else with exactly the same experience. Exactly the same thing happened. I came out of the vision, I said, good try. On the 3rd time, after I told my students, no, you're not being abducted by alien individuals, you've been abducted by your own species hiding behind this technology, so that they can unify the whole of human consciousness to be focusing on there's an external force that wants to hurt us. No, we don't want that external force, because it's going to disrupt our monetary system, it's going to disrupt all the power mechanisms on this planet. So they don't want these new technologies to come in, but they're okay with taking those technologies and using them for their own devices. Now, the last time, instead of saying I got abducted, I got taken into another state of consciousness, in a visionary state, which is transdimensional. And I was up in the air, looking down. My feet were hanging down, my hands are out like this, and I could see the turmoil of the waters underneath me. And I thought, oh no, there's something wrong with the planet. And at that particular point, I couldn't say good try, because I was totally fixed. So they got the frequency which would fix me to realize what was going on, because they realized they couldn't capture me because I was defiant. So they got a frequency which puts me into a visual state that I couldn't control. And then I hear this click, 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 click coming from behind, and they're like a man's high heels on glass. Yeah, like man's shoes. They walk through the office, click, 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 someone with authority, and came up and he grabbed me by the shoulder and he said, Luhan, you don't deserve this. Now, when this occurred, there was no explanation to Luhan, you don't deserve this. What it was with the words in the transdimensional state had volumes of meaning. So the moment he touched me, I realized the information. The moment he said 3 words, Luhan, you don't deserve this, he took me away from the vision, broke it from me, but there was a memory in my visual matrix which didn't belong to me. So the first thing was you got this memory. if you don't keep your mouth shut, this memory will be activated, and there'll be a certain technology in the future will be able to look into your mind and say you've committed a crime. And then they've got you. So they can insert these memories the same way that they can insert feelings with this memory. So it becomes quite complete. And then you've got no way to escape this, because it's in your feeling center and in your memory matrix. So anyway, when the guy touched me, what he was saying, that there's a certain percentage of us that doesn't want this to occur anymore. But there's another percentage that doesn't want anyone to realize, because they will be made so responsible for what they've done. It's treason, worldwide treason, because you can't do this to your own species and expect to get away with it. So they're waiting for a certain amount of time for those people not to be accountable, because they'll die. So that's why disclosure is taking so long to come to the surface, because those people will be accountable. Yeah, and they really do want this to be released, but at the moment what they're doing is saying, look at these crafts, they're triangular, they've got 3 dots on the bottom, they're ours. They're not alien, they're reproduced from alien craft, and we've got this technology. So we're seeing a lot of this technology now and saying this is aliens, but it's a testament to our human ingenuity to actually manipulate the vehicles that they've got into a human production that we can fly. And we're out there, and we're not meant to be out there, because we're not balanced enough to be out there, because we're not in harmony with the universe. So we're meant to be isolated, but we're not isolated because we learned to take them down, and we've taken this technology and we're advancing too quickly. And if we keep going the way we are without taking into consideration what we really need to do with consciousness, we can have high technologies, but if we don't have the consciousness to accompany with that, to accompany the higher technology, then our consciousness is going to fail. We'll just implode, because we can't handle what we've got, because we're not mature enough to handle it. And the reason we're not mature enough, it's obvious the reason why we're not mature enough to handle it is because we've got the technology and we're still beating the same drum. Keep everyone controlled, keep everyone in a state of fear. Don't tell them what we've got, because we've gone like this, and we started to raise our technological advancement, and then we're meant to go like that, but we can't go like we're on this very, very strange curve, which will probably mean the destruction of our species, because we're meant to go boom and reach that high technological state and accept it and evolve very, very quickly. But we're being stalled, and we can't be stalled anymore, because it's not viable for our consciousness to be stalled anymore, because the last 100 years is like 2,000 years worth of technology being wasted, because every 100 years represents thousands of years of progression. And this last 100 years, we've lost thousands of years of possibilities in terms of the technological advancement that we could be having, but we're not having that. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah, so I'm curious about kind of what we can do to kind of, or like is there a moral imperative for us to do Lo Ben Pai, or do our practice, and to raise our own consciousness to support the whole?
Yeah, because let's look at it this way. You've got cosmic entanglement. What is cosmic entanglement? It is like, if I have a feeling in my heart and my heart is opened enough, there will be a certain element within me that will spin. And then the corresponding species that realizes that I'm open will turn its face to me, and then I realize I don't belong here anymore. And if I realize I don't belong here anymore, I belong somewhere else, and I'll start to work on where I am until I leave. That's the way evolution works. You wake up, you share your inspiration, and then you die, and then you go to the inspired point, which gave you the revelations of growth within you, and you've shared it, and then you leave. Some Buddhas come back, but a lot of Buddhas or Tibetans now are saying we don't want to come back, because we're being interfered with in terms of the growth of humanity. It's no use coming back, because we're being recycled in a repetitive fashion. So it's like when you look at karma, the reduction of karma on this planet, we come in with our natural karma, we come in with an open heart, and then we've got situational karma, which has been set up for us to get confused with. So there are 2 types of karma: the karma you're meant to experience, and I know everyone's going to fight me with this, because they say karma is very, very complete. But if someone makes karma for you and enthralls you in the social engineering, that becomes what is opposite of what you're meant to realize. So that's situational karma. And situational attunement with a karma you shouldn't be involved in, so you get entangled with that, and your original karma disappears, or your purity disappears, because you get sullied by what's being presented on the planet, instead of the planet saying, okay, your karma is to be peaceful, loving, open, progressive, and learn from this particular point where you're meant to ascend to. But we come to this planet where we go the opposite direction. Very, very few people can say, well, I'm going to fight for my right not to be enthralled with this situational karma which has been set up for us. It's really strange, because if you say take away everything that gives you a feeling of distress, you're left with an abundance and a feeling of, wow, the person stopped this, I feel free. So that's situational karma. So from a Vedic perspective, they'll say that the situational karma is your karma. But if people are intelligent enough on our planet to realize that we can interfere with karma by making a situational attunement and situational awareness that we can't escape, because we get enthralled in the social engineering, we've got karma that doesn't belong to us. We're being tricked. So if you look at that from this perspective, and you look at your situation, you're living the living essence of your circumstance, you say, why is this happening? It shouldn't be happening. Everyone says this shouldn't be happening. What's going on? It's wrong. You take that away, you become free. But to take that away, you've got to take away all the power mechanisms that make this occur, to free you to the prospect of your own evolutionary process in terms of what you feel is right to be done. Yeah, and that's for the pure side of the human being. Because someone who's not pure, they're fine with the manipulation and fine with the game. They'll play that game to become wealthy, and you stay poor. And situational karma is something we have to come to terms with, because if our governments do the wrong things and they're going down the wrong direction and not honoring the people who sustain our planet, because every single individual from poor to middle class to upper class, they sustain the planet. So we've got to look at that from a fair perspective and say, okay, we want more than what we're getting. We want to change it. As soon as you want to change it, there's a diversion. Oh, there's a war here, there's something there. And everyone goes down this path of situational karma, and we get enthralled in what's going on our planet. It's all planned. It's got nothing to do with what we're really meant to be experienced. It's got everything to do with what they want you to experience in comparison to who you're really meant to be. That's all I've got to say about that.
Does this relate to Dharma and Adharma?
Yeah, well, explain Dharma and Adharma from your perspective.
I don't know. I can't remember how you put it in the book, but it basically is like you have this perspective that like I'm good, and like this is good, and that's bad, and like I'm supposed to be doing this and not supposed to be doing that. But like,
yeah. Okay, now these are rules and regulations. Why have we got rules and regulations in terms of Hinduism, in terms of Patanjali putting a Dharma and Dharma up? Why have we got this? Because we can't govern our own lives, because the situation is so confusing for people who want to govern their lives, who want to go on their true life path. Their true life path, their true Dharma is right in front of them, but the world is giving something different to what you're attuned to. And then you're supposed to work on your situational attunement internally to actually to use that situational karma as a challenge to your righteousness, so you can purify yourself by not falling into the trap of lower forms of feeling, lower forms of realization. So if you look at it from this perspective, rules and regulations are only given to people who don't understand that they can actually govern their lives through a righteous feeling and a pure, open feeling of compassion and gratitude. Once you've got compassion and gratitude, you don't need anyone to tell you what to do. You'll just realize what needs to be done. And then when you realize what needs to be done, you go, gosh, why is there so many barriers for what needs to be done? Because situational karma is stopping this. Same, the Dalai Lama was kicked out of Tibet. Why? Because you follow the essence of your heart, and it's not a religion, it's a life path. So if your life path is purity, then you've got universal consciousness in the palm of your hand, and the small morsel of realizations you can get from that is the biggest thing you could ever realize. But situational karma, it teaches you sorrow, it teaches you regret, it teaches you that other people suffer, you've got to save them, and if you suffer, hopefully someone's going to save you. This is not the world we're meant to be born into. This is the enslavement of our consciousness. I'm putting you to sleep, Kyle.
I have a question related to that, Lujan. In the States, we started in spite of everybody calling it like a democracy. The founding fathers were quite clear about the difference, that they were establishing what is it called, a constitutional republic, or
yep.
And that the difference is that what can happen in democracies, pure democracies, where the majority rules, is this idea of tyranny, by majority rule. You see it now in this kind of woke mindset, that if you don't agree with the mainstream narrative, then you're antithetical to it and you need to be canceled or something like that. Like, you can see how ideas can catch fire, and the collective consciousness of the society can bully people that don't look like, think like, sound like, talk like, the majority, and all of that kind of stuff. And so that's why our government is structured in the way that it is. But also, part and parcel to that is that, who is actually qualified to set the trajectory of a nation. There's certainly different levels of...
Okay. Who's got authority? The people who really care about the people. That's who's got authority, because the people rule, not the rulers. Right. So in the form of democracy that you're talking about, means that the people's will is the way, and then we grow from our individual need to prosper within the small parameters of this system, which is really not working. And you have good people, you can become prosperous, but we need to become more than just prosperous. We need people that obviously in government to be truthful, to be honest, to do the right thing, and work for the people, not work for themselves. This is the problem. You can't work for yourself when you're working for the people. You've got to literally work for the people, absolutely. And if the person, when you work for the people, then the spiritual prospect becomes the major focus. What do we need as a humanity? What do we need to do as separate countries so that we can unify and become one being? This is what's not happening. So if we can get somebody in government that says, well, okay, we've got to do the right thing, we've got to look after the veterans because they're on the streets, and then there's somebody else is being looked after and they're not being looked after. They're getting you used to whatever you want, you don't get it because somebody else is going to get it that doesn't necessarily deserve it, which debunks your capacity to be honored as a human being for what you've done. Yeah. So we give this honor to the people who haven't done anything because we want someone to vote for us. So we give them everything they want at our expense, instead of coming into the country illegally, or any country illegally, sorry, but they come in illegally and then they're used as voting mules, as people to support the wrong agenda. I'm getting very political now, aren't I? So when you really look at this, I mean, what do we need? Everybody knows what they want and what they need. Everybody knows what they expect, and they know that if you expect what we really need, and if you have this fantasy, you should be able to get what you expect. They call you a utopian, small-minded idiot, that this will never happen. And everyone's got so used to this statement, is that we should be prosperous. There should be no starvation in the world. We should be prosperous. Everything should be done collectively for everybody. Nobody should be left behind. You go to war, you don't leave your friends behind when they're wounded. You pick them up and you save them from their fate. So life we're in a state of war. We need to save each other. And if our military people save someone, that brings them back, and then they become crippled, we've saved them from that situation, but we have them save them from the situation that they really need to be saved from and really need to be nurtured. There's something wrong with our consciousness when it comes to this. Well, not the consciousness of good people, but our resources are being used for the wrong things. instead of using them for the correct ways and means to move forward. Yeah, and we can't be set with the illusion that that these people come here and they're different. This creed and division has got to do with dividing us, you know. And we shouldn't really be divided, because there's no color. We're all blood. We've got red blood. We've got a pumping heart. We're just human beings. We should not be divided with color and creed. We should not. We're all human beings. And if we look at it from this perspective, everybody needs to be loved and cherished. That's kind of utopian, isn't it? But it's the truth. Everyone needs to go to a higher form of enlightenment, a higher form of caring for an individual circumstance, and individual people who don't know what they need to do in life because they're desperate and they don't have the education. But if you give that person the right to express themselves in the way which is uniquely their personality, you'll find that they'll make great things happen on this planet. But if you put them into poverty, they'll never know who they are. Best way to control somebody.
Okay. To wrap this up, we've got a few minutes left, but I just want to bring it back to aliens again. So I have two questions. The first one is, there's a story, one version of the story about the Greys is that they are some future version of humanity, that we evolve and there's a split in our evolution where there's the people that want to merge with technology, and there's some kind of avatar body that they're able to transplant human souls into that operate through these synthetic skins, and then the other one were more of a genetic manipulation branch of human evolution, and that those people screwed up and they got to a point where they couldn't continue to reproduce, and so they have to travel back in time to find young enough DNA from us. That's why we're getting abducted. That's the story. That's the story that I've heard. Is there any truth to that? And then I'll ask the next question after you address that.
Okay, Looking Glass. You're talking about Looking Glass. Now, we have the capacity to move forward and move backwards. We already know this. We've got the technology for it. 500 years in the future, they perfected this. So people from 500 years in the future can appear here right now. So if they've got they have a certain amount of memory or an impulse of feeling, they'll follow that impulse of feeling, because when they travel back from the future, they have to obtain the memory that they're meant to have, and that's the most confusing thing, because that memory is wiped. As soon as you come in, it's wiped. Your birth and your death is recorded immediately as soon as you get into the reality, and then you're flipped into the matrix. But yeah, we are coming back from the future, but changing our present moment to try and devise something better for ourselves is actually what's going on. And yes, you're right. The future is manifesting in our present moment as orbs that are coming from a future perspective to manipulate our reality in terms of changing our belief system into something quite broader than the small, stilted view that we have. Yeah, and it's a really big subject, Dave, and it's a hard one to go into.
Sure, that's probably addressing it enough for what time we have left. The other one is that I've had many experiences in my life where I have kind of sleep paralysis, and then during the sleep paralysis, I see entities. And I know, for whatever reason, I know in that state that if I can only roll onto my right side, that I can break the sleep paralysis and get out of that state, because what those entities always seem to look like is demons. I've at least 3 times, 3 different very distinct types of demons that I've seen. Are demons some kind of alien, or is that a different realm? Like, what is happening in that sleep paralysis state?
Okay, this is something I've experienced in my life as well. First, you've got to ask yourself the question: would you have demonic realizations in a state of paralysis, where you've lost control of your body, which is the major fear factor in the first place? If you were born on a planet that was totally embracing you, would you ever have these visions? Would you ever have this in your consciousness?
No.
There's the answer. It's got to do with our species, not to do with entities that are providing evil for us. we provide that evil through the malformation of our intention in the world. It comes back to us to be reorganized, and we are faced with groaning and gnashing of teeth because we're facing who we were in comparison to who we were really meant to be. So gnashing of the teeth and going into purgatory is something you experience in life, and it's a preparation for maybe 1,000 years in limbo because you didn't act correctly while you were living. And that's the test of this planet. To be or not to be is a question.
Yeah, I've had a couple of experiences. We don't have enough time to go into all of what I'd like to say. Maybe that's for the next podcast. But I've had experiences of being in a place that seemed like purgatory. And I was communing with a friend of mine that had died recently, actually. But it was a very structured kind of a place where everybody was being sorted and organized in a kind of a way that was almost more controlled and more dogmatic than what we experience here. But it was like some kind of parallel to what this is, that we didn't really have agency. My communication with the person that I was connecting to there was like we were breaking the rules. There were these sentinels that were giant, enormous creatures that you could just sort of see the figure of what they were, but they were like shepherds of our souls or something like that. And that, again, is there an alien connection to this? Is this part of? Was it just a fever dream? Like what was that?
Well, loss of agency, and then the appearance of something higher than your agency, and your agency wasn't delivered into the world. You weren't born into the world with true agency. You were born in with the agency, the confusion of good and evil. So then, if you do something which is away from the prosperity of your heart, then that agency is lost, and your governing process of your own consciousness has to be directed, or you sort your own consciousness out by seeing there's a higher entity which is a representation of you, and then with the lower forms of reference that you've applied yourself, you can't escape from being herded because your higher self knows that it's incorrect. So then you can look at this in terms of a trap, because everything should dissolve because nothing exists. So from where nothing exists to where everything exists, then there are conscious realms where that realization can be represented to your consciousness to say, well, how do you feel when you don't act properly right now? If you make a mistake, you're caught within that feeling, you're trapped within it until you free yourself and give yourself permission not to be there. Isn't that true?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So when you're in a state of consciousness, when you're there, you've got higher beings looking down on you and saying that you can't go any higher than what we are. It's exactly the same as their own personal experience. We don't forgive ourselves for quite a while once we realize we've done something which doesn't really represent who we're really meant to be, and we will mourn over that. Yeah. I mean, these are simple answers, but if you were in a pure state, does anything really exist other than existence itself? And then the joy of experiencing everything that can be experienced in the physical manifestation is only really 1%. Even though the emptiness is nothing, there's only 1% of you, or even 99% of that 1%, experiencing what you're experiencing, and that's a trap. And that's a Shiva Shakti or a Hindu perspective in terms of the location of consciousness, in terms of where we direct it as impure beings. And I'm not debunking your experience either, because your experience is valid and real for you. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. The same as my experience is real and valid for me. So I look at that and I say, well, what am I meant to do with this challenge? I'm meant to realize that I need to be in a deeper state of gratitude, a deeper state of communion, and that we've got to fight for the right of this world to be upright, to the point where all this disappears, because we're not subject to our own degradation, and we're not subject to the degradation of a world community that's been directed onto the wrong path. Yeah.
Okay, Kyle, do you have any final thoughts, any final questions?
No, it was thorough. More thorough than I was expecting. Thank you, Luhan. Appreciate it.
I think we put Kyle through the ringer, Luhan.
Always
Fatigued him. Okay, once again, thank you all for visiting and listening to the podcast. Do us a favor, like, subscribe, share, send us questions to info@parallelperception.com. Check our social medias. At some point, we're going to send out an invite to the new online community. And we love you all. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.